Chapter 1. The Stirring of Shadows. The silence of the tomb was thick, undisturbed by the passage of time. Darkness blanketed everything, a quiet so absolute that Kasep's stillness seemed to merge with it, an eternal vigil bound to nothingness. Yet even in this vast emptiness he was alert in some distant part of his mind, held captive by a purpose forged in life and seared into his bones in death. He knew not the passage of years, only that his king's rest must remain undisturbed, his loyalty unbroken. But then, something changed. A faint tremor touched the air, a disturbance that echoed through the walls of the tomb. It was barely a whisper, but to Kasep it might as well have been thunder. Slowly, as though from a distant dream, he became aware of sounds, footsteps, faint and cautious, intruding into the stillness. Murmurs in a strange, foreign tongue rippled through the silence like cracks in stone. Kasep's awareness grew sharper, his senses gradually emerging from the depths of the necrotic slumber he had known for countless ages. His mind, at first sluggish and distant, began to stir with purpose. He did not yet open his eyes, nor did he rise, but memories began to flicker within him, a life of service, a city of sunlit splendor and unyielding loyalty, and an oath he had sworn to protect this sacred place. The sanctity of his king's tomb was his duty, an eternal bond that bound him to vigilance in life and death. As the voices grew nearer, Kasep's awareness sharpened. He could feel the intruders' presence now, outsiders, unfamiliar and brash in their trespass. They moved clumsily, their feet scuffing against the sacred stone, their careless hands brushing along walls, etched with ancient sills. His mind surged with indignation, a fire kindling within the hollow chamber of his chest. He recalled the grandeur of Nehekhara in its prime, the glory of his people, and the kings who had ruled with divine might. His loyalty to his king, the revered protector of Khemri, had been his life's purpose. And when that life had ended, his purpose had continued, his loyalty carried forward into eternity. That loyalty had brought him to this duty, and the violation of these intruders awakened his wrath, stirring his bones into motion. Slowly, deliberately, Kasep began to rise. He opened his eyes, or what was left of them, the hollow sockets filling with a cold, unnatural awareness. The tomb was dark, but he could see clearly, each shadow and shape etched against his mind, as if he had been watching all along. His armor, though faded and tarnished, still clung to his form, the insignia of his king faint but resolute on his chest plate. The weight of his weapon, a spear, its metal dull but solid, felt familiar in his grasp. Kasep took a step forward, his movements slow but steady. As he moved, he caught sight of the intruders, a handful of foreign figures dressed in strange, colorful garb, carrying lanterns that cast flickering light onto the walls. He observed them with cold detachment, noting how they spoke in hushed tones, their eyes gleaming with the greed of opportunists. They pointed at artifacts along the walls, their voices a mixture of excitement and wonder, entirely unaware of the insult they were offering to the ancient guardians of this sacred ground. The sight stirred something deeper within him, and he felt the resonance of his king's command in the ancient, unspoken words of the oath he had taken so long ago. Protect the sanctity of this place. Guard the tombs. Let no unworthy soul disturb the rest of Nehekhara. The command reverberated through his being, in order that transcended time and place. These intruders, these reckless souls, were threats to everything Kasep had been sworn to protect. They would know the consequence of their trespass. They would feel the wrath of Nehekhara's guardians. The footsteps of the invaders drew closer, and Kasep sensed that he was not alone in his awakening. He could feel the faint stirring of others, his comrades in death, the countless tomb guards who lay dormant alongside him, each bound to the same purpose, each rousing at the same affront. Their spirits pulsed with the same ancient duty, echoing his thoughts and binding them together in shared purpose. Through the still air, Kasep heard one of the intruders laugh, a sound too loud, too casual for these hallowed halls. Anger flared within him. Did they not understand? Did they not feel the weight of the centuries, the solemnity of the space they had invaded? The laughter subsided as the voices continued, their foreign tones grating against the silence. Kasep watched as one of the treasure hunters reached out, his hand lingering over an intricately carved sarcophagus, his fingers brushing against the ancient hieroglyphs that told the story of a warrior long forgotten by the world above. The sight was enough to seal Kasep's resolve. In that instant, the echo of his loyalty surged to life, filling him with a dark strength, a power rooted in the very sands of Khemri itself. His movements were silent, his form nearly blending into the shadows as he advanced, each step resonating with purpose. The other guards around him stirred, their awareness igniting as they too sensed the intrusion, the violation of their sacred duty. Together, they formed an unbreakable line, a force bound by honor, undeterred by the passage of centuries. Kasep gripped his spear, feeling the weight of it, and took another step forward. Though his flesh had long since decayed, his resolve was undiminished, his loyalty unbroken. He would protect these tombs, just as he had sworn to in life. He would not allow these intruders to defile the resting places of Nehekhara's honored dead. The shadows stirred around him, the faint sounds of armor creaking and weapons shifting as more tomb guards awakened, each drawn from the depths of their slumber by the shared memory of duty. Kasep felt the silent presence of his brethren as they joined him, their hollow eyes trained on the intruders, each step they took heavy with the weight of ancient purpose. The treasure hunters, oblivious to the growing threat, continued to speak in excited tones, ignorant of the doom that loomed around them. They had trespassed where they did not belong. They had defiled what they could not understand. And now, Kasep and his brethren would ensure they faced the price. As he drew nearer, Kasep's grip on his spear tightened, his hollow eyes fixed on the figures before him. His mind was filled with a singular command, an oath that echoed through him like a battle cry: guard the tomb. Let none escape. Chapter 2. Desecration of the Tombs. The air grew heavier with each step as I moved deeper into the crypts, the ancient walls whispering of memories I hadn't touched in ages. My mind, dulled by centuries of silence, slowly began to sharpen, drawing forth the echoes of a life lived in Nehekhara's golden light, a land where the sun once warmed the sands, and the kings ruled with divine authority. I remembered the gleam of armor under the noonday sun, the quiet murmur of loyal voices, and the boundless pride that had filled my heart as I swore my loyalty to my king. These memories fueled me now, giving me purpose as I moved through the shadows. But here, in the sacred halls, something foreign had taken root. The tomb had been breached, its silence shattered by the sounds of desecration. I pressed on, the dim glow from the torches of the intruders illuminating twisted fragments of what had once been whole. I reached the first sarcophagus, and my hollow gaze fell upon the scene before me. The slab of stone had been overturned, and the lid of the ancient casket was pried open, exposing the skeletal remains of one of my comrades. His armor lay scattered, his blade discarded, as if his rest was a thing of insignificance. A twisted feeling surged within me, something dark and ancient, an anger as old as the sands themselves. The treasure hunters knelt beside the shattered tomb, their hands rifling through the fragments of my comrade's legacy. They muttered to each other in eager voices, holding up amulets, jeweled necklaces, and relics that had lain untouched for centuries. They saw these treasures only for their shine, unaware that each piece held meaning, each item bound by the spirit of Nehekhara's legacy. To them, these were things to be taken, sold, or bartered. One of them, a man with a scarred face and gloved hands, lifted an amulet that bore the sigil of my king, laughing as he tucked it away into his pouch. He did not see the faint shimmer of power that lingered on the relic, the quiet resistance of a thing that should never have been touched. The memory of my king's command pulsed through me, and my hands tightened around my spear. Defend the tomb. Let no defiler walk unpunished. I took a step forward, my presence masked in silence, observing the foreigners as they continued their sacrilege. Another hunter wrenched a scarab pendant from the skeletal remains of a lesser noble, grinning as he dangled it in front of his companion. Each act of greed was another strike against the sanctity of this place, each careless motion further rousing the spirits of the tomb. From beyond the stone walls I could sense others stirring, my brethren awakening as the whispers of desecration reached them. We were all bound to this purpose, an ancient web of loyalty stretching across ages. The disturbance spread like a ripple, the insult reaching deeper and deeper, summoning those who had sworn oaths and bound their souls to our land. A faint murmur filled the tomb, a quiet, hissing whisper as more of my kind rose from their slumber. I could feel their wrath, a collective anger that mingled with my own. Our numbers grew with each affront, each stolen relic, each overturned sarcophagus. We were an unbroken chain, a silent legion, bound not by mortality but by duty, and that duty had been violated. The treasure hunters had no sense of the wrath they were summoning. One by one, they tore through the offerings that had once been laid with reverence, their laughter and whispers echoing through the sacred halls like poison. They were blind to the curses that clung to each relic they claimed, the silent vengeance of Nehekhara woven into every artifact. They saw only the gold, the jewels, the shimmer of a wealth they could not understand. A final surge of anger washed over me as I watched one of them force open the lid of a sarcophagus that bore the markings of a high-ranking warrior, a man I had fought beside, his name etched into the stone in hieroglyphs that spoke of honor, courage, and loyalty. His bones lay scattered on the ground, his burial shroud torn and trampled under the boots of a man who knew nothing of the respect he deserved. The hunter laughed, lifting a silver mask that had once belonged to a noble of my king's court. He turned it over in his hands, ignorant of the history it carried, the countless years of devotion that had imbued it with silent power. He could not feel the curses embedded in its metal, nor did he know that each touch was an offense that could not be forgiven. In that moment, all hesitation faded from me. I felt the weight of my king's command pressing upon me like a second death, binding me once more to his will. My hand gripped my spear, its metal cold but solid, and I took another step forward, emerging from the shadows into the dim glow of their torches. My brethren moved beside me, each silent as the grave, each prepared to deliver justice upon those who had defiled our sacred halls. One of the hunters turned, catching sight of me. His eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing his face as he stumbled back, his hand going to his weapon. The others followed his gaze, their laughter fading as they saw the advancing line of tomb guards, our eyes hollow yet fierce with the ancient purpose that had called us back from death. I took another step, raising my spear. The room fell silent, the intruders frozen under our gaze as the reality of their actions settled upon them. They had entered our tombs as thieves, ignorant of the legacy they had disturbed. But now they would know. They would know the wrath of Nara, the fury of those who would never surrender their duty. My comrades advanced beside me, their bones creaking, their armor clinking in a ghostly chorus as we moved forward. And as the first scream echoed through the tomb, I felt the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. Chapter 3. Awakening the Tom Kings. The quiet fury of our march echoed through the narrow stone halls, a gathering tide of wrath that grew with each silent step. I moved among my fellow tomb guards, their eyes, like mine, empty yet fierce, each of us bound by an oath we would carry for all eternity. We were not yet in full view of the intruders, but I could hear them ahead, their voices and footfalls brash and unheeding. They were close, dangerously close to a place no mortal hand should ever dare disturb. Ahead lay the chamber of a lesser tomb king, a noble whose honor and ferocity had been unquestionable in life. His legacy was carved deep into the walls of Khemri, his victories marked by monuments that still stood under the sun. In death, his command was unbroken, his spirit bound to Nehekhara's defense just as mine was. Though I had not seen him since our days in life, I knew my king was here, locked in sacred rest, until the time came for his wrath to be unleashed once more. The relic hunters stumbled into his chamber, their torches casting unholy light across his resting place. Their eyes widened as they took in the sight. A grand sarcophagus, ornate and terrible, covered in the ancient inscriptions of Nehekhara kingship. But they saw only the jewels set into its surface, the gold that glinted under their torchlight. To them, this place was a vault to plunder, a mere cache of treasures. They understood nothing of its meaning. One of them, a tall man with a grim expression and eyes alight with greed, approached the sarcophagus, his fingers tracing over the sacred symbols with a casual disregard that made my bones ache with rage. They spoke among themselves, their foreign language carrying tones of excitement and carelessness. They did not see me in the shadows, watching as their hands closed around the edges of the sarcophagus lid. When they began to pry it open, my hands clenched around my spear, the urge to strike them down nearly overwhelming. But I did not move. This was not my place to act. This was the domain of the king, and it was he who would deliver judgment upon these foolish mortals. As they heaved the lid open, a gust of cold air burst from the sarcophagus, rippling outward like a wave of silent fury. I felt it pass through me, an ancient chilling force that called to every spirit in the crypt. The intruders staggered back, coughing as the stale, cursed air filled their lungs. Then the tomb fell silent, deathly still as the last of the air settled. And then, from within the sarcophagus, I saw movement. Slowly, regally, the form of the Tom King rose, his decayed hand gripping the edge of the sarcophagus as he pulled himself to a sitting position. His eyes, hollow and filled with a dark glow, fixed upon the trespassers with an expression that held millennia of anger. His presence filled the chamber, his silent authority commanding all in his sight. The intruders stared in horror, their earlier confidence dissolving into raw fear. They began to stumble back, muttering to one another in panicked tones, but the king's gaze held them fast, like prey caught in the jaws of a serpent. His withered face twisted with rage, his bony hand lifted in a silent gesture of command that resonated through my very bones. As if in answer, we, his loyal tomb guards, advanced, the soft clink of our armor a warning echo through the chamber. I moved forward, joining the ranks of my brothers, each of us ready to serve as we had in life. We formed a line behind our king, our spears held high, our movements a silent testament to his power. The Tom King's hand rose higher, and I felt a surge of dark energy pulse through the tomb, reaching out to the spirits slumbering in nearby crypts. One by one, they awoke, stirred from their rest by the will of their king. From every corner, from every shadow, more tomb guards emerged, skeletal forms and rotting flesh bound by armor that had withstood the decay of centuries. We were legion, and our king had summoned us to defend his domain. The treasure hunters, now aware of the gravity of their actions, scrambled to escape, their faces pale and drawn with terror. But their path was blocked, the dead closing in on every side, their eyes empty, but their purpose fierce. I took my place among my comrades, feeling the strength of our shared loyalty, our bond to the Nehekharan land that pulsed beneath us. Our king rose fully from his sarcophagus, his once magnificent robes hanging in tattered strands, but his dignity undiminished. He extended his arm, pointing a single finger at the intruders, a silent command, a death sentence. The weight of his fury pressed upon us, and we moved as one, each guard advancing with unyielding purpose. The first of the hunters fell as a spear pierced his side, his cry of pain cut short as he crumpled to the floor. Another tried to draw his sword, but his shaking hands betrayed him, and he was swiftly overpowered by a guard who struck with a vengeance that echoed the wrath of the king himself. The room filled with the sounds of their panic screams, their desperate pleas. But we felt nothing, no sympathy, no hesitation. We were the guardians of Nehekhara, our souls sworn to protect what these intruders had violated. One by one, the hunters fell. Their torches flickered and died as their numbers dwindled, the light swallowed by the darkness of the tomb. The last hunter, his face twisted with desperation, threw himself to the ground, pleading for mercy in a language I barely understood. But the king's gaze remained cold, his judgment absolute. No words could redeem this act of sacrilege. In that final moment, as the echoes of battle faded into silence, I felt the Tomb King's gaze fall upon me and my brethren. Though he spoke no words, his command resonated within us all, binding us even deeper to our duty. We had defended his domain, and the price for trespass had been paid in full. As the last of the intruders' breaths faded, we knew our purpose had been fulfilled, for now. We turned to our king, each of us bowing in silent reverence. His form returned to his sarcophagus, his spirit settling back into rest, but his fury remained, a warning for any who might dare defile these halls again. Chapter 4. The Curse Unleashed. The silence of the tomb was thick once more, the cries of the intruders fading as swiftly as they had risen. But as I stood among my fellow tomb guards, watching the last hunter cower before the king's silent judgment, I could feel something else stirring, a ripple of dark power, a presence older than memory itself. The relic hunters sensed it too, their faces paling as the weight of ancient magic pressed upon them. They had tasted the edge of our wrath, yet still their greed spurred them on, clouding their judgment with a desperation I could see in their eyes. One of them, clutching the torch with trembling hands, backed away from the king's chamber, his gaze flickering across the walls as if searching for a path to escape. Then, in a moment of heedless avarice, he reached for an amulet hanging from a dusty alcove, an ancient relic crafted by our priests, one meant to remain untouched by mortal hands. The gleam of jewels embedded in its surface had caught his eye, blinding him to the dark aura that surrounded it. I watched, powerless to stop him, as his fingers closed around the amulet, pulling it free from the wall with a sharp tug. The tomb shuddered. A deep, resonant tremor coursed through the stone, echoing down the dark halls and through the layers of the crypt, as if the very bones of Khemri were responding to the desecration. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and the walls seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent glow. I felt the ancient curse awaken, its power seeping into the very air, coiling around each of us like a spectral chain. The curse had been triggered, its wrath unleashed upon the intruders with a force beyond mortal comprehension. The walls shifted, groaning as they moved, forming new pathways and sealing others. Doors that had once been open slammed shut with a thunderous finality, their ancient mechanisms grinding into place, trapping the hunters in the twisting labyrinth of our domain. I watched as panic overtook the intruders, their eyes darting wildly in every direction, their earlier bravado crumbling as the reality of their predicament settled over them like a shroud. "Did you feel that?" one of them whispered, his voice barely audible, filled with terror. What did we do?" They moved as a herd now, driven by fear rather than greed, clinging to each other as they stumbled through the shifting corridors. Each step they took was a step deeper into the heart of the necropolis, the ancient curse guiding them away from any path that might lead to freedom. They were at the mercy of the tomb's magic now, a force they could not hope to understand or overcome. As I watched them flee, the curse surged through me as well, a dark strength that bound me even more tightly to my duty. I could feel the weight of the curse settling over my bones, solidifying my purpose with a power that resonated deep within my soul. My loyalty to my king, my oath to protect the tombs, it was no longer just a duty. It was a binding, an unbreakable connection woven into my very being by the curse. The other guards felt it too, their movements sharper, more purposeful, each of us drawn together by the same dark force. We were bound not only to defend our king's resting place, but to ensure that no intruder escaped. The curse fueled us, fed upon the fear radiating from the intruders, growing stronger with every tremor in their voices, every hurried step they took. The hunters stumbled into a corridor lined with statues, their torchlight casting long shadows across the faces of ancient kings and warriors. One of the intruders brushed against a statue, triggering a hidden mechanism. With a grinding roar, the statues sprang to life, swinging their weapons down in swift, merciless strikes, cutting off the hunter's path and forcing them deeper into the tomb. Another trap was triggered as they turned a corner, hidden spikes emerging from the walls, narrowly missing one of the hunters as he leapt back with a scream. They ran, their footsteps echoing through the darkness, the sound mingling with the quiet, steady rhythm of our march. Each trap they triggered seemed to echo with the curse's relentless power, sealing their fate with every misstep. As they fled, I felt the pulse of the curse grow stronger, binding me to the tomb with a fierce, unyielding grip. It was as if the tomb itself were alive, each stone and shadow working in harmony to exact vengeance upon those who had dared to desecrate its sacred halls. The power flowed through me, sharpening my senses, steadying my spear in my hand. My loyalty, my purpose, it was clearer than it had ever been in life. I was no longer merely Kasep. I was part of the tomb itself, a guardian as ancient and immovable as the stone that surrounded me. The hunters stumbled into a grand hall, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, their faces pale with terror. They had lost their way, their fear blinding them to the paths that might have led to safety. I watched from the shadows as one of them, The same who had taken the amulet clutched it to his chest, as if hoping it would offer protection. He did not know that it was the source of his doom, the trigger that had awakened the tomb's wrath. One of the hunters, desperate and trembling, turned to his companions, his voice breaking as he whispered, We have to get out of here. This place, it's cursed." His words hung in the air, a futile plea, as the walls began to shift again, the corridor narrowing and sealing them in. The fear in their eyes fed the curse, strengthening it, binding them more deeply to the fate they had invited upon themselves. They were prisoners of their own greed, condemned by the very treasures they had sought to steal. I moved forward, my spear raised, my gaze locked on the intruders. The curse had given me new strength, an unbreakable resolve that guided my every step. My brethren moved with me, their eyes empty yet fierce, their loyalty as unwavering as my own. We were no longer mere sentries. We were the instruments of the curse, bound to exact the vengeance of Nehekhara upon these defilers. As the last of the doors sealed shut, I felt a surge of satisfaction, a dark, quiet triumph that resonated through my bones. The tomb had reclaimed its power, its sanctity restored by the ancient curse that bound me and my brethren. The intruders were trapped, ensnared in the maze they had dared to enter, and their fate was as certain as the sun that no longer touched these hallowed halls. With each step I took, the curse pulsed within me, an eternal reminder of the duty I had sworn to uphold. The intruders could run, they could scream, they could beg for mercy, but there would be none. The curse was unrelenting, an ancient promise of retribution that would ensure none escaped. And as I raised my spear, preparing to fulfill my oath, I knew that Nehekhara's wrath would be complete. Chapter 5. Memories of Nehekhara. The corridors of the tomb echoed with the uneven footsteps and ragged breaths of the intruders, their voices stilling as they plunged further into the depths of the necropolis. I moved in silence, my presence hidden within the shifting shadows as I watched their every misstep, each panicked glance they cast behind them. The ancient magic of the curse, heavy and binding, urged me onward, but there was something else stirring within me, a memory, distant yet achingly familiar. As I followed the intruders, scenes of my life began to fill my mind, as if called forth by my undying purpose. I remembered the sands of Nehekhara beneath my feet, the warmth of the sun as it blazed upon the horizon, casting its light upon the golden city of Khemri. I remembered the pride that had swelled within me when I was chosen to serve as a guard to my king, the one who held the divine mandate to protect and rule our people. Each memory was a thread woven together to remind me of who I had once been and who I was now. In life, I had stood vigilant at the gates of the palace, armored and resolute, my spear an extension of my loyalty. The king had trusted me to guard his chambers, his treasures, his very life. To me there had been no greater honor. I had sworn an oath, a solemn promise to defend his name and his legacy, a promise that had not been broken by death. Even now I felt the weight of that duty pressing upon my bones, a purpose that transcended mortal years. The intruders stumbled into a larger chamber ahead, their torches illuminating walls lined with murals depicting scenes of Nehekhara's glory, images of warriors in gleaming armor, priests offering sacrifices to the gods, and kings seated upon thrones of gold. The murals captured a time long lost, when our people ruled under the favor of the gods, when our land had been bathed in both beauty and power. For a moment I paused, my gaze fixed upon the murals as memories flooded back. I remembered walking through grand halls, the scent of incense in the air, the sound of distant chants as priests called upon the favor of the gods. I remembered the laughter of my fellow guards, the pride we had shared in our service, the sense of purpose that had bound us all. And now I stood as one of the dead, a shadow of that golden past, a sentinel bound to the will of a king who no longer lived. Yet in this form I felt no bitterness. My purpose was eternal, my loyalty unbroken. I had been chosen to guard this place, and even in death I was fulfilling that oath. My king's treasures, his legacy, were bound to the sanctity of Nehekhara, and I would ensure that none would defile them. Ahead, the intruders' frantic flight slowed as they entered a chamber filled with treasures. Their faces, once twisted with fear, softened into expressions of awe, their eyes widening as they took in the gleaming array of artifacts laid out before them. Golden masks, jeweled goblets, delicate amulets adorned with sacred symbols. All lay untouched, preserved by the tomb's silent curse. Each item was a relic of Nehekhara's history, a piece of the heritage that my king and the First had sworn to protect. One of the hunters let out a low gasp as he approached a golden statue of a falcon, its wings spread in a regal pose, symbolizing Oathkeeper, god of the sky and kingship. He reached out, his trembling hand brushing against the statue's wing. In life, I would have cut him down for such a sacrilegious touch. Even now, I felt a surge of anger rise within me, my grip on my spear tightening. They did not understand the gravity of what lay before them. They saw only the wealth, the allure of treasures they could not fathom. Another hunter approached a jeweled amulet, lifting it with reverent fingers, the greed in his eyes veiled by his awe. They did not know that this was a place of sacred power, a place where the spirits of our ancestors rested. Their every touch, every stolen glance, was an affront to the sanctity of our tombs, an insult to the gods who had watched over Nehekhara. I felt the wrath of my king stirring, reaching out to me as if commanding me to act. My memories of loyalty and service burned bright, strengthening my resolve as I prepared to confront these intruders. I had served my king in life, and now, in death, I would defend his legacy with the same unyielding determination. The treasure hunters' voices grew louder as they discussed the relics they had claimed, oblivious to the curse that lay upon each item. They did not know that with every touch, every stolen artifact, they were binding themselves deeper into Nehekhara's curse, sealing their fate within the dark corridors of the tomb. The ancient power in the air swelled, responding to their blasphemy, drawing upon their fear and greed to strengthen its hold. As the intruders turned, preparing to leave with their plunder, I stepped forward, my spear raised, a silent guardian bound to deliver judgment. My brethren moved beside me, each of us bearing the unspoken command to defend our king's honor, to protect the sacred heritage of Nara. The hunters froze, their faces once more twisting into fear as they realized their folly too late. I watched as their awe turned back to terror, their stolen treasures slipping from their fingers as they scrambled to flee. But there was no escape now. They had bound themselves to this place, and no plea, no prayer, could break the curse they had invoked. As I advanced, the memories of my life filled me with a fierce pride, a reminder of the purpose that had guided me through centuries of silence. I had been a guard of Nehekhara, loyal to my king, devoted to my duty. And though I now stood in the hollow form of the dead, my loyalty had not wavered. With a final silent vow, I stepped forward, prepared to defend Nehekhara's sacred heritage for all eternity. The intruders would learn the price of their greed, and I would ensure that the honor of my king and my people remained untarnished. They had come seeking treasures, but they would leave with nothing more than the cold, unyielding knowledge that Nehekhara's guardians would never rest. Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. The hollow silence of the necropolis was broken only by the frantic footfalls of the intruders, their breaths harsh and labored as they stumbled through the maze of tombs, each step taking them further into the dark heart of Nehekhara's ancient resting place. I moved silently behind them, my brethren and I blending into the shadows, our hollow eyes fixed upon our quarry. Their desperation was palpable, a sour scent of fear that filled the air as they clutched the stolen relics to their chests, ignorant of the curses clinging to each artifact. The chase had led them to the central hall, the very heart of the necropolis. It was a vast chamber, its high ceilings adorned with murals depicting the great deeds of Nehekhara's rulers, illuminated by the faint, ghostly light cast from the eternal flames in the sconces along the walls. Statues of kings and queens stood sentinel, their faces fierce and unyielding, the guardians of a kingdom that had once basked in glory. The treasure hunters skidded to a halt in the center of the hall, their eyes wide as they took in the intimidating grandeur of the space. For a moment they stood there, silent, their breathing the only sound echoing off the stone walls. I halted with my fellow guards at the edges of the chamber, hidden in the shadows, watching as the intruders turned in circles, searching for an exit that did not exist. They were trapped. I tightened my grip on my spear, feeling the familiar weight of duty settle within me. My mind was clear, my purpose resolute. These men had defiled the sacred tombs of Nehekhara, disturbed the peace of our kings and stolen treasures that were never meant to leave this place. There would be no forgiveness, no clemency. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. One of the hunters, his face pale and drawn, began to fumble with the relics he carried. He clutched a golden amulet in trembling hands, turning to his companions with desperation in his eyes. We can give it back," he stammered, his voice hollow with fear. Maybe if we return the relics, they'll let us go." Another hunter nodded frantically, his eyes darting to the shadows, as he placed an armful of jewels and ornate artifacts on the floor, his expression a mask of terror. Yes, we'll give it all back. Please, we didn't know." Their voices echoed through the hall, a cacophony of pleas and promises, each word a pitiful attempt to bargain for their lives. But their words meant nothing. They did not understand the wrath of Nara, the unwavering resolve of the dead to guard what they had been sworn to protect. These relics were not mere objects. They were vessels of power, sacred symbols of the people and gods of Nehekhara. A low, resonant voice filled the hall, a sound that chilled even my long-dead bones. It was the voice of the Tom King, his tone laden with a timeless authority that brooked no defiance. His words echoed from the shadows, each syllable a command that resonated through the walls, pressing down upon the hunters with an invisible weight. "You come to steal the treasures of kings, and now you seek mercy," the Tom King's voice intoned, each word a blade cutting through the darkness. "You are unworthy of this land, unworthy to touch the relics of Nehekhara. Your lives are forfeit." The hunters fell silent, the color draining from their faces as they grasped the full weight of their situation, their treasures scattered on the floor before them, forgotten in the shadow of the Tomb King's judgment. They looked around wildly, the hopelessness of their plight dawning upon them as they realized there was no bargaining, no compromise to be had. I felt the command of the Tomb King settle over me like a mantle, a binding of purpose that coursed through every part of me. My loyalty to my king, my dedication to Nehekhara, strengthened as his voice filled the chamber. I was a vessel of his will, my spear an extension of the judgment he had decreed. There would be no mercy, no leniency, for those who had desecrated our sacred ground. With a single nod from the Tom King, we, his loyal guards, stepped forward in unison, emerging from the shadows that had concealed us. The hunters recoiled, their bodies trembling as they beheld the legion of undead advancing upon them. Their wide eyes reflected the hollow light that shone from our empty sockets, the silent, unyielding resolve in our expressions. They had trespassed where they did not belong, and they would now face the retribution of those they had so carelessly disturbed. One of the hunters raised his hands, desperation overtaking his senses as he fell to his knees. "Please, we didn't mean any harm. We will leave, we swear it." But I felt nothing. His pleas fell upon ears that had long ago left behind the weaknesses of the living. The Tom King's words echoed in my mind, his command binding me to the duty I had sworn in life and carried with me beyond death. My loyalty to Nehekhara was eternal, my oath unbreakable. These men would face the consequences of their actions. Together, we advanced, the steady clinking of our armor echoing through the chamber, the relentless rhythm of inevitability. I felt no anger, no hatred, only the unyielding purpose to see my duty fulfilled, to restore the sanctity of this sacred place. The relics these men had stolen lay scattered at their feet, reminders of the lines they had crossed, symbols of the history they had so recklessly tried to claim as their own. One of the hunters made a final, desperate attempt to flee, his footsteps echoing in the hall as he turned toward the shadows. But he stumbled, his legs failing him as panic overtook his senses. Another tried to draw his weapon, his hands shaking as he brandished it with clumsy fear. But these were futile gestures, the actions of men who had already lost, who were condemned by their own greed. The Tom King's voice filled the hall once more, a command that resonated through each of us as we drew closer to our prey. "Defend this place. Leave none who defiled it standing." With his words, we surged forward, our spears raised, our movements unified by a purpose that transcended mortality. The hunters' screams filled the air, mingling with the relentless advance of our footsteps, the sound a final testament to the fate of those who dared trespass upon the sacred tombs of Nehekhara. As I thrust my spear forward, reclaiming what had been stolen, I felt the satisfaction of a duty fulfilled, of an oath kept even through the ages. These men had sought riches, treasures, glory, but they would leave with nothing more than the curse they had brought upon themselves. Chapter 7. The tomb seals again. The silence settled over the tomb like a shroud, a stark contrast to the chaos that had filled these halls moments before. The air was thick with the memory of battle, the lingering whispers of the trespassers' last cries, still fading into the dark. All around me, my brethren stood motionless, their hollow eyes fixed upon the scattered remnants of the intruders who had dared to defile this place. As I looked over the desecrated relics and broken bodies, a deep sense of purpose filled me, a satisfaction that went beyond life or death. We had fulfilled our duty, reclaimed what had been ours to guard, and the sacred trust bestowed upon us by our king and our people had been honored. My bones, once bound to restless watchfulness, felt the faint release of peace, a distant echo of the pride I had known in life. The Tom King, still and imposing, surveyed the hall from his place of honor. His gaze swept over the silent guards, lingering on each of us as if marking our loyalty. Though his face was a mask of death, there was something regal in his bearing, a command that had not faded with the ages. His will bound us all, his presence a reminder of the honor that was ours to protect. With a slow, deliberate movement, the king raised his hand, his bony fingers tracing a pattern in the air. I felt the subtle pull of magic, ancient and vast, weaving itself through the walls, through the stones, reaching into the shadows of the necropolis to restore what had been disturbed. The tomb responded to his call, the stones shifting and grinding as if waking from a long slumber. Cracks in the walls began to seal, doors moved back into place, and the air grew colder, more settled. One by one, we set to work, our movements silent and precise as we restored the crypt to its rightful order. The traps we had set and sprung in defense of the tomb were reset, each one primed and ready to strike at any future intruder who dared breach these halls. The relics that had been disturbed were carefully placed back into their alcoves, their ancient curses renewed by the king's silent blessing. I lifted a fallen amulet, its surface smeared with the blood of one of the invaders, and returned it to its rightful place, feeling the faint hum of power as it rejoined the artifacts of our people. My gaze traveled over the stone murals on the walls, each image a testament to the legacy of Nehekhara, the priests in solemn rites, the kings in their resplendent glory, the warriors who had fought for their land and honor. These were the memories we guarded, the legacy we had been charged to protect. And today, once again, we had honored that charge. The Tom King lowered his arm, his command complete, and turned to face us one final time. Though he spoke no words, I felt the weight of his gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the duty we had all performed. His presence, vast and commanding, filled the chamber, and I knew his will had been restored, his place of rest safeguarded once more. Return now to the silence, his voice whispered within my mind, resonating through my very bones, a command as ancient as the sands of Nehekhara itself. The words carried with them a finality, a sense of closure that resonated deeply within me. I took one last look around the hall, my gaze lingering on the scattered remnants of the intruders, now forever part of the tomb they had sought to rob. Their bodies would lie here as a warning, a reminder that Nehekhara did not forgive those who trespassed against its sacred halls. The tomb had reclaimed its peace, and soon it would be as if these intruders had never been. I stepped back, taking my place among my brethren, each of us moving toward the resting places from which we had risen. The air grew colder, darker, as the final barriers of the tomb closed in around us, sealing away the outer world and returning us to the eternal silence. As I descended into my own crypt, a deep, solemn peace settled over me. The duty that had bound me was renewed, the oath I had sworn unbroken. I felt the presence of my king within me, his command a quiet pulse that would guide me through the endless darkness. The last faint glimmer of light disappeared as the tomb sealed itself fully, casting the necropolis into complete darkness. I closed my hollow eyes, feeling the weight of silence wrap around me like a cloak, knowing that I would remain here, vigilant and steadfast, until the end of time. And in that silence there was peace. Chapter 8. Eternal Vigilance. The silence had returned, thick and complete, resting upon the tomb like a shroud. I moved slowly, each step a measured farewell to the path I had walked, to the duty I had performed. My brethren were already retreating to their tombs, their armor clinking softly, the sound fading as each of us returned to the darkness that was our domain. I felt the quiet call of my own resting place, the pull of the eternal slumber to which I was bound. Yet I lingered a moment longer, alone in the shadows. The memory of our enemies' cries still hung in the air, a fleeting reminder of those who had come with greed in their hearts and fallen under the weight of their own ambition. Their relics now lay untouched, safely returned to their places, guarded once more by the ancient curses of our land. My duty was complete, for now, and the tombs of Nehekhara could rest in peace. But deep within, I knew it would not be forever. There would be others. There would always be others. As I turned to descend into my crypt, memories of Nehekhara stirred in my mind, flowing through me like the distant, quiet call of a river. In my mind's eye, I saw it as it once was, a land of blazing suns and vast deserts, temples that soared under the gaze of the gods, and kings whose presence was like the fire of the sun. I remembered the bustling marketplaces, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the noble warriors who had stood beside me, each of us bound by an unbreakable loyalty to our land. We had been proud, fierce, a people chosen by the gods themselves. I remembered the day I swore my oath to my king, my heart swelling with pride, as I pledged my life to defend him, to guard his legacy, even beyond death. It was an honor unlike any other, a purpose that had given my life meaning and direction. And when the time came, when my life had drawn to a close, I did not question my duty, did not flinch, as I felt myself bound to these tombs, my soul anchored to the land that had given me everything. Nehekhara was in my blood, in my very bones, and in this silent duty I found peace. But as I looked upon the remnants of the defeated intruders, I felt a tinge of sorrow, a bittersweet reminder of what we had once been. Our treasures, our history, the legacy of our kings, these were no longer known in the world above, their stories lost to the shifting sands of time. Yet here we remained, guardians of a glory long forgotten, protectors of a past that had passed beyond memory. The quiet echo of the Tomb King's command lingered in my mind, steady and resolute, a reminder that even in death, we were bound to this duty. For as long as the sands of Khemri endured, we would remain eternal sentinels in a world that had forgotten us. Others would come, drawn by the allure of wealth, by the mystery of Nehekhara's ancient past, their greed and ignorance leading them to their doom. But we would be here, waiting, ready to defend the sacred halls they sought to defile. I turned back, moving slowly toward my tomb, feeling the weight of my armor settle upon me once more as I embraced the silence. Each step carried me deeper into the darkness, yet there was no fear, no regret, only the quiet satisfaction of a duty fulfilled, a purpose that bound me as surely as life itself had once done. The stone walls of my crypt rose around me, familiar and comforting, the silence a balm that settled over my bones. As I reached my resting place, I knelt, bowing my head in a final act of reverence to my king, my people, to the Nehekhara I had loved and defended. In life and death, I was bound to this place, an unyielding guardian who would keep watch over these hallowed halls until time itself ceased. Closing my eyes, I felt the cold stillness embrace me once more, and in that darkness, I made a silent vow I would remain eternal and vigilant, a defender of Nehekhara for as long as the sands endured. And in that vow I found peace,